This episode of Between Two Psychs is proudly sponsored by Sanctuary Personnel. As a specialist recruitment partner across psychology services, education, social care, and healthcare, Sanctuary is dedicated to connecting talented professionals with organizations that truly value expertise. They take a consultative approach, meaning they understand the sectors they serve across the UK. If you're looking to strengthen your team or elevate your own career, visit sanctuarypersonnel.com. You can also reach out directly to Kamru Zaman at k.zaman@sanctuarypersonnel.com and Susie Cousins, s.cousins at sanctuarypersonnel.com. Contacts in the description. Thank you and enjoy the episode. Hello and welcome to another episode of Between Two Psychs. Today I'm joined by Delyth Lynch, Director of Safeguarding at Wellington College, where she's spent the last 16 years helping shape one of the UK's leading approaches to safeguarding culture. Her work has influenced national guidance, been cited by the Independent Inquiry into Child Sexual Abuse, and earned multiple national safeguarding awards. Delyth is the author of Beyond Compliance, the DSL's guide to creating a school-wide culture of safeguarding, and is widely recognised as one of the leading voices on creating cultures where safeguarding becomes everyone's responsibility rather than simply a matter of compliance. Delyth, welcome to the podcast. How are you today?
I'm all right. It's a bit hot, Adam, but apart from that, doing okay.
Excellent. I'm glad to hear that. It is very hot at the moment. We're right in the middle of a heat wave, aren't we?
We are.
And on a personal, I'm quite excited to have you here. No one's ever made me excited to talk about safeguarding, but when I read your book, I thought, actually, there's something in here, and I wanted to get you on the podcast. So there's a few things I picked out from reading your book, and the first thing that came to me is that you make sure that it's not just a tick box exercise. You really want to ingrain this into the culture of schools, don't you?
Yeah, I do. And I'm so glad that you've said that you really enjoyed looking at it and related to it, because when I wrote it, I wanted it to be something that was really relatable. I think I remember when I started my teaching journey, which was a long time ago now, when people used to talk about health and safety and safeguarding, everyone used to roll their eyes in the lecture theatre and half of people used to stand up and leave. And one thing I've been so passionate about is to get everybody to realise that safeguarding is actually really interesting, and that everybody in a community has got a very, very unique part to play within that. And I've always been a firm believer that it's not policies that keep people safe, it's actually the people that live and work within a community that keep people safe. I very often talk about safeguarding as walking across a landscape, and across your landscape, we are human beings walking across that. So imagine you're going on a journey, on a walk in the Lake District, something like that. What you have that you're walking across, the topography, if you like, is made stable by what lies beneath it, so the bedrock. So thinking about organizational values, the way things are done in a community, if that's really firm and stable, when the weather comes in, as it will do, particularly in schools, young people will test us and try us out, because that's what we do. That's why we're there, and we like it when they do that. But if we've got stable ground to walk on, then actually the journey becomes easier when the mist falls or it starts to rain. However, what I would say, though, is that the policies are like our maps. The policies will guide us. But if that ground is stable, then with the policies and the stable ground, that all comes together, and it just makes that safeguarding landscape a lot easier to navigate.
You mentioned there, I love the fact you brought in values and then you moved on to policies. It's like those two interact. Your policies, your guidance, the explicit guidance, so to speak, but your values is the intrinsic motivator. And I think schools are organizations, and, the corporate sector will spend a lot of time talking about their values and how they communicate that to their employees.
Yeah.
And from what I'm hearing you speak is there's an element of that has to happen within schools. Why are we here? And, different teachers will have different answers. Some might say that I'm just here to teach because I enjoy teaching. Others will be, I want to inspire students.
Yeah.
What when your experience of, because you've been around doing this role for a while now, what's your experience of how people assimilate values within school cultures?
I think that's a great question. I think if you have a set of organisational values that the whole community buys into, a common language, if you like, we're very lucky actually at Wellington in that gosh, how long ago would it have been now? Around about 2008, so almost 20 years old now, we had a whole community exercise to set organisational values. At the same time, I had the NSPCC come in to look at some safeguarding practice. And they came away and they said one of the things that you could think about doing is values and attitudes based interviewing. And we looked at it with them, and we now do VBA interviewing at Wellington. So for everybody that comes to the organisation, they will have their usual standard set of interviews. Whether if they're teaching, obviously they'll have their lesson, they'll have their usual interviews with various members of staff. But every single one of them will also have a VBA interview. And what we're trying to do there is we're trying to look at their values and whether they're aligned with that of the organisation, and also whether those values are going to help guide them through that safeguarding landscape as well. And we've tweaked them over the years. We now have an EDI strand, we have a safeguarding strand. Our organisational values are core to that. What you need within an organisation is not people just saying that they've got values. You want it from the beginning right through to the very end. It's like a journey. So all of the staff that come here know that they're going to be tested on those values. It's that Johari window. We're trying to find out that hidden self before they come here. They then have a values.
I should say for the listener, the Johari window is what you consciously know about yourself versus what you unconsciously don't know about yourself, and the two
That's
intersect.
right. And the VBA interview is trying to find out what you don't know about yourself.
Yeah.
And traditional interviews don't very often give a good window into that. But then it's all about how do you message those values through your everyday language. And so our behavioural policies are based on the values. Our staff performance reviews are all based on the values. And so those 5 values that we hold very dear at Wellington are part of the language that we use. And I certainly use them a great deal within low-level concerns conversations. So, for example, members of staff that have got something wrong or done something inappropriate, we can actually have that conversation based on perhaps the value of kindness or the value of integrity. We've done a really big piece of work this year with the charity Words Matter on the impact of verbal abuse and words, particularly around teachers, and how they can really matter to young people. And
you're talking about teachers' words towards students.
Yeah, teachers towards students, that's right. And it's really timely, actually, because Keeping Children Safe in Education 26 came out yesterday. Thank you, government, for that lateness. But it's
good
brilliant.
For this podcast timing, though.
Brilliant, yeah. Isn't it fantastic that for the first time, the impact of words and verbal abuse has been specifically mentioned within that? And so I can sit down with a member of staff and I can say to them, look, let's think about the value of kindness. Was it kind when you said that to a young person? How do you think they might be feeling? And it all just helps shape the conversation, I think.
And you're walking on a knife edge there, because at the same time, you're showing challenge, but you have to maintain your value of kindness. So showing challenge in a kind way, and that takes skill. And again, coming back to culture. So it's about how you do that throughout the whole system. In your book,
I've got a big sign on my wall, actually, Adam, that says "Clear is kind." I'm a firm believer that if you're clear and you do it in a kind way, then that's actually much more helpful for individuals than if you.
It's certainly in the long term. It is absolutely. I've just come away from an assessment whereby that was the theme. The child valued clarity above all else. Then it was nice adults.
Yeah.
In your book, you talk about submerged rocks. This is a concept I loved reading about. Tell the listener about what is a submerged rock and why is it important?
Yeah, so it's about It's the rocks that sit underneath the waves. So it's time, isn't it? We're all going into summer holidays. We might go to the beach, and those rocks will shape the waves the way that the waves form above them. But actually, if we go paddling and we can't see those rocks, we'll stub our toe on them.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the people that you want in your organization are those people that spot those submerged rocks.
Mm.
And as I was writing the book, I began to think about what those submerged rocks might be in a way that I hadn't seen another safeguarding book before. So it's things like biases, for example, and thinking about the sorts of bias thinking that safeguarding professionals may fall into, and then what can we have within our organizations that prevent those biases from forming. I think it's certainly in my organization and in the teams that I've worked with, one of the ones that I particularly relate to is groupthink.
Mm.
So when, lots of individuals who have been to the same type of school, same area, they come with the same set of judgments and experiences of life. And so really being conscious of that, I think I've always been mindful that you should try and have a really diverse group of individuals around the table. So if you're discussing a young person, for example, trying to have somebody that represents them and how they might be thinking, having the child's voice there. We also have a set of questions at Wellington, a bit like playing a devil's advocate, that helps us challenge things in a different way. So we might be talking about a male student, and then one of those challenge questions would be, would we be making the same decision if it was a female student? Just to try and tip it on its head a little bit.
That's a fantastic coordinated way to look at it. And, you started talking there about the people being those submerged rocks, but then you started moving into how the systems worked. And you even had that analogy of how the waves can change based on how the rocks sit underneath. And
Yeah.
that's really good visual, I feel. You talk about challenging biases, and I think that's very apt. I've just seen a conversation happen on one of the social medias, I wouldn't say which, whereby send is an excuse for bad behavior coming from someone who is quite senior
Mm,
in a secondary school. That is the sort of biases that we're talking about, isn't it?
yeah.
Not tarring everyone with the one brush. You did it with gender there. Just because a male student might act one way, we may see the same behavior in a female student. We need to be aware of those unconscious biases within ourselves.
Yeah.
I think that's fantastic and such a strong tool within a safeguarding culture.
Well, I think the question that we all need to ask ourselves as professionals as well is and remind ourselves that all behavior is communication. So when a young person is behaving in a certain way, what is it that they're trying to tell us?
Yeah. And we
And
can't
how can we
categorize
work
them.
with them?
We can't categorize things just as a threshold. So if you exert this amount of behavior, you get this label. Going back to what you were saying, behavior is communication, and communication is linked to a value system. That
Yeah,
child's value system, the organization's value
of
system,
course.
how we treat children and how children treat us are both communicating value systems. And if you don't make an effort to try and understand those two sets of values, you're not really going to be able to shift that culture, which is what your book is all about, isn't it? Is all about shifting cultures.
Yeah, it is. And actually, we've just done some research with our students around how do they want their teachers to communicate with them. And the biggest thing that came out across all age groups was they wanted teachers to know that when they were trying, and if they got something wrong, it wasn't necessarily because they weren't trying. It could be for a whole variety of different reasons, and just to have a conversation with them about why they didn't get such a high mark as they maybe expected, rather than just assuming that they just hadn't put any effort in. And so it
Yeah.
comes down to those relationships, doesn't it? It's all about relationships.
Everything comes down to relationships. If you go on my website, it's pretty much tarred all over the place, and to the point where people start to think it's a typo. And relationships are absolutely key. A previous guest we had on, Andrew Curran, spoke a lot about
Mhm.
relationships are key in terms of optimal dopamine release, which is necessary for learning.
Yes.
And the best way to get that release is to feel that you like the person you're in the room with. You feel safe with them. It's all about that relational
100%.
aspect.
Yeah. And that they
Yeah.
believe in you. If you've got, these young people who sometimes really struggle at school, they might not have anybody at home, in their family, in their, wider circle that believes in them as a person. And if you can just allow that young person to know that there's something about them that you can, yeah, you can really make a difference.
Teachers sometimes are the third parent.
Yeah, they are.
Hmm.
Yeah.
I want to move on a little bit. You go into your book in quite a bit of detail about empathy and cognitive load. Tell me how
Mm.
those two factors interact.
Yeah, so this came about. I did a piece of research actually for the Boarding Schools Association about 10 years ago. And within it, what came out of it was that when staff were really busy and had lots and lots to think about and feel really overwhelmed, they don't actually become less caring. They just become less curious because their brain is so overloaded with what's going on. They haven't got the time to stop, look, and notice.
Hmm.
Um, so, for example, you've got a teacher who comes across something at, let's say, 8:30 in the morning, really fresh, nothing's happened, much more willing to investigate and be really curious about a young person's behaviour. Get to 3:45 p.m., busy day, lots to do, lots of lessons, emails, marking, etc. You become much less curious, and you start there to maybe think around normalizing some behaviors. You see something, you think, oh, that's not quite right. I haven't really got time to do anything about it. I'll deal with it tomorrow. By the time tomorrow comes, it becomes less important. And suddenly that behavior that child might be showing just becomes normalized over time.
Mm.
And I think that's where safeguarding starts to become really vulnerable. And I think people become much more task focused when they're really busy and overloaded, um, rather than relationship focused, to come back to relationships again.
So, what can we do about it? Is it a case of addressing the cognitive load?
That is a really great question. I think it's about making your staff feel valued and appreciated.
Hmm.
And again, some of the work that I've done in the past, you're 4 times more likely to notice things if you feel a sense of value and appreciation within your organization.
Wow.
So I think it's really important that middle leaders and senior leaders in particular really do make sure that those people in their teams do feel valued and appreciated for the work that they are doing.
Yeah.
Every teacher, I think, in the land will tell you that they are busy and they've got a lot to do. I think those people that are sitting particularly in empathetic roles, pastoral leaders, safeguarding leads, they do need time to do their job properly. And they need their line managers to be listening to what they need and what support that they might need as well. So I think that is just super important.
So, is it a case of those line management meetings showing more value based principles? So, showing appreciation for efforts that staff have made?
I think that's part of it.
Is there any more
I think,
aspects
they
to it?
they do need to look at workload as well. We've just joked about keeping children safe coming out yesterday. Most teachers are about to go on their summer holidays, with the major key piece of safeguarding legislation having come out on the 7th of July, when some schools have even broken up. So those very people that need that break away from that very demanding frontline empathetic work will be having to spend a proportion of their holidays updating policies to make sure they're compliant by the 1st of September. So
Yeah.
there's some external influences on that. Um, but I think as human beings, all of us, if we were to think about what makes us go to work in the mornings, it's about knowing that we're trusted, that we've got that sense of autonomy within our work as well. I think that can be a really important factor, that we are that professional learning is really
Mhm.
crucial as well. Is there a culture of learning within the organisation?
What's the benefit of having a culture of learning on the individual?
I think a culture of learning also builds in reflection, because if you by and large, if you're a learner, you're also a reflective practitioner as well. And I think that's
Which means your
crucial.
practice becomes better, more efficient.
Yeah.
You said about spotting vulnerabilities 4 times as much, I think you said.
Yeah, that's
So they
right.
become much more proficient at their job. Is that right?
But also, I'd take a slightly different lens on that as well, that if you're reflective about your own practice, then what you're allowing yourself to be is vulnerable, and think, gosh, I might have made a mistake there. What could I do differently next time? And that builds up. It's almost a self-perpetuating cycle. If you're reflective, then you're more likely to learn. And if you learn, you're more likely to be reflective.
Just try to put myself in the shoes of a teacher and admitting I was wrong. I wonder how many of our colleagues would be able to go with that.
Well, again, it's part of the culture, actually, Adam, and that's part about role modeling as well. I've always stood up in front of my staff, and when I've made a mistake, I will say, "Look, I've made a mistake. This is what happened. This is what we did wrong. This is what we're going to do differently next time."
How's
Really
that
listening.
received?
When I often quote, I often quote Brené Brown, actually, because one of the definitions of vulnerability that she uses is when you're vulnerable if you give somebody a piece of information and you don't know what they're going to do with it.
Yeah, that's
And
true.
I think that sits brilliantly in safeguarding, because take a young person that comes to my office one day. Let's say they've got something to disclose, something that maybe is happening at home. They haven't told anyone else about it. My goodness me, there's no better definition of vulnerability than that young person coming in with that piece of information and not knowing what might happen with it, which again, it comes back to those relationships. If they know that they're going to be able to talk to you, to trust you, you believe in them, then that vulnerability for them is less of a gap.
Yeah, I want to move off cognitive load shortly, but there's one last aspect of it I want to talk about because relationships is really coming through in this chat. And we know that if you feel that you have a good relationship with someone, your ability to learn is greater as an adult or as a child.
Mm.
And you said about line management support. Is it possible that just by having good quality relationships between line managers and teachers, that the cognitive load will reduce, which means the capacity for empathy will improve?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah,
Because there's lots packed up in that, isn't there, Adam? Because I think if you are finding something difficult, if you've got a great relationship with your line manager, you're more likely to go to your line manager and say, I'm finding this a little bit difficult at the moment.
yeah.
How can we work together to solve that? I think if you have a very difficult relationship with your line manager, then actually there's no trust there. You might think, I don't want to go to my line manager and say I'm finding this difficult because I don't know what the response might be. And yeah, so there's a lot packed in there.
Yeah, I'm just thinking line managers will be listening to this. What's one simple thing they can do to support their teachers to have a closer relationship with them?
Listening and empathy, I think.
Yeah. I wondered if it was your modeling that you talked about.
Yeah, yeah, modeling
Mo-
as well, definitely.
Modeling when they get something wrong as well, but certainly
Yeah,
listening and empathy works. That
yeah,
needs time though, doesn't it? And schools are busy environments,
it does. And I think one of the things I talk about in my book is that schools are very transient communities.
certainly in this country.
We within the student body, we have, a huge turnover at the end of every year as we've got new students coming in, we have our leavers departing. And I think sometimes it's hard to remember that, you'd say, oh gosh, I spoke about that aspect of online safety last year. I don't need to do it again. And then suddenly you remember that 200 children haven't heard that message yet.
Mm.
But the same goes for staff as well. A lot of schools will have a percentage turnover of their staff bodies each year. And it's really important that if safeguarding is not part of the culture within an organization, then what can very quickly happen is behaviors can be driven by individuals within the organization rather than the culture within the organization.
Yeah, and I've seen organizations, school organizations, where the culture is very nurturing, warm, and good. A few key people leave,
Yeah,
then it falls into crisis very quickly,
that's
very
right.
quickly.
Yeah.
One, I want to thank you so much for coming on today.